program has been funded by KCC's Broadcasting Communication Development Fund.
May 18th, Democratic Uprising, 37th Anniversary Special Documentary, A Memory Never Lost. Part 2, The Inherited Memory of May 18th, Seeking a Way to Heal.
광주 출신 꿈에는 어떤 식으로든 오일팔이 나오는 거예요. 어떤 흔적으로라도.
콩을 봉태기 발사를 해버리는 거죠. 그래가지고 거기서 총을 맞고.
10 years ago, my mother completed suicide. This is a difficult issue to speak about.
군인들 개머리판으로 분합발로 죽으면 또 맞았고 그러는데.
Because this is a truth. If I do not speak about it, it may repeat within the family.
그러니까 사실은 배 속에서 어떤 식으로든 5.18을 경험한 거죠. 어떤 길쌈 같지 않아요? 이게 세대와 상관없이 연결되는 이 모든 것들이.
I noticed the same thing, that trauma is a cycle, that it involves not just the individual relationship to people, but society as well.
무슨 일만 있고 좀 저기 하면 얘가 뭐 괴물처럼 변해버려요. 그 순간 지난 건 몰라요. 내가 언제 그랬냐.
에너지는 어딘가에 사라지지 않아요.
The saying is that time heals all wounds. 37 years have passed, and with the passage of time, both memory and wounds blur. However, for Kim Tae-soo, who 37 years ago carried the wounded citizens in Gwangju to the hospital in May, time never faded those memories.
80년도 당시엔 일반 시민이었지만은 환자들이 생기다 보니까 환자들 우선시키고
I was a citizen at that time, and I carried the injured citizens to the hospital. And one day I fell asleep because I couldn't sleep for 3 days. And when I passed near the Gwangju prison, there's an interchange road around the prison, and I was driving out of the city to welcome some students there, and suddenly the army at the prison fired machine guns blindly. I thought I didn't do anything wrong, so I didn't run away. While I was getting shot in the car, the army dragged me to the prison late at night, nailed me down against the wall, and I was hit with the butt end of a rifle while being kicked with military boots. Whenever I recall that memory, it feels so traumatic, and I often need to go to the hospital.
죽으면도 맞았고 그러는데, 아이고 그 생각만 하면은 저는 이제 이렇게 평상시에도 있다가 느닷없이 아파서 병원을 가기도 하고.
For 37 years, he tried to forget, though his memory did not disappear. But Mr. Kim has experienced more traumatic events. Shortly after May 18th, his daughter developed a disability. His second daughter began showing signs of mental illness.
80년 이후로 제가 이제 국립나주정신병원에서 입원을 하라는 걸 입원을 안 했어요.
After 1980, doctors at Naju Psychiatric Hospital advised me to go to the hospital, but I didn't, and I took the medicine for a few years. After that, my first baby was born with a disability. Even worse, my second daughter, when agitated, becomes quickly enraged. She was a good student, and she studied well. Her room was full of certificate of awards, and when she went to high school, the weather was not good, or if she was not in a good mood, she lost her reasoning. But when she's not in a good mood, she completely becomes a different person. She tries to kick me, and she kicks my car, saying she's going to stop me going anywhere. But then when that moment passes, she forgets what she did. She always says, "That's not what I did."
내가 언제 그랬냐.
From 2012, the Gwangju Trauma Center started the psychological healing work of the May 18th democratization activists and victims of national violence. It started with the awareness that the trauma caused by national violence could not be eradicated over time and would have to be healed before it was too late. However, something unexpected happened in the beginning. Most of the victims acknowledged that the trauma affected not only themselves, but also their families. Yet many did not fully participate in the healing program. The head of the Gwangju Trauma Center, Oh Soo-song, diagnoses the problems not as individual issues, but as problems that our society has not solved.
사실 트라우마의 가장 중요한 거는 제가 보기에는 그 사회적 지지예요.
The most important thing for the treatment of trauma is the support from the society. If you don't have the support, you cannot share your story with others. Think about the reason why the May 18th trauma has lasted this long. The public hearing wasn't held until after 8 to 10 years of the massacre occurring. And the way people had to live their lives for those 8 years was horrible.
문제는 뭐냐면 8년 사이에 이 사람들이 어떻게 취급당했느냐 하는 겁니다. 그러니까 계속
They were chased. They were fired from their jobs. Even after the public hearing, some people tried to split the victims in half, whether because of their association with the injured or because of their being part of the bereaved families.
갈라서게끔 만들고 이게 그 사람들의 그거죠. 그러니까 부상죄는 또 부상죄대로 갈라놓으려고 그러고 유족해는 유족해도 갈라놓으려고. 트라우마 자체가 지금 더 중요한 게 아니라
Trauma itself is hard to overcome. However, a trauma which occurs after another trauma makes people's lives even harder.
The more I try to understand, the bigger the misunderstandings. I try to relive the memories of this trauma. We hope that the victims' minds are not running away from that day in May 1980. Nevertheless, the years have passed. The name mob was changed to victim or benefactor, but still, these people were afraid to leave the world. It was not just a wound, but a huge fear, and there is anxiety engraved in the body.
치유의 면도 조금 다른 식의 어떤 접근을 그러니까 어떻게 보면 뭐냐면 가장 중요한 게 안정성. 내가 안전하게 내 얘기를 갖다 할 수 있는 어떤 분위기를 만드는 거.
The treatment of trauma should be approached in a different way. The most important thing is the feeling of being secure. I have to be able to talk about my story safely. The situation here is different from the 9/11 terrorist attack. It's not safe here. What would you do if the investigator interrogated you later? Again, the most important thing is to be able to guarantee your safety.
지금 보니까 가장 중요한 게 안전을 자기가 보장받는 거. 그게 우선 치유의 시작인 것 같아요.
If you feel stabilized, you can talk about your story without worrying about anything, and you'll see the effect of treatment in the end.
그렇게 되면 굉장히 치유 효과가 빨리 나타날 수 있는 거죠. 그래서 아마 이런 이 트라우마 같은 경우는 아마 문화적인 어떤 것들이 상당히 지금 고려가 돼요.
So, the cultural background can play a big role in the healing of trauma.
The healing program of the Gwangju Trauma Center has been going on for 7 years. The time spent between the victim and the healers proved necessary, and it strengthened the credibility of the healers. The May 18th victims' wounds are gradually healing, and recently the Gwangju Trauma Center has launched another new healing program. There is a program that heals the children of the May 18th victims. Kim Chan-ho, official of the Gwangju Trauma Center, realized that the psychological problems experienced by the children were connected.
대부분의 사례가 이제 5월 당사자들이 당신이 갖고 있는 심리적 어려움을 이기기 위해서 이제
Lots of victims of the May 18th crackdown resort to alcohol or violence to overcome their psychological difficulties, and I think this environment naturally makes their children's lives even more difficult, both economically and psychologically. They are having difficulties in their lives, and our center provides them with some help.
어떻게 보면 이제 그런 것 같아요. 그러니까 중고등학교 때 이제 그런 걸 갖다 경험하면 어떻게 되겠어요?
Yeah, I believe so. Imagine what would have been if you had experienced that during your school years. You know, you'll have to be proud of yourself when you become men of national merit, but at the same time, they hate their parents are them. This is a paradoxical structure inside of them. This is not really a good thing. I think the affection and the hatred towards their parents are mixed inside of them.
It is certainly a welcome change for us to begin to realize that it is connected to the social pain of May 18th, not seeing the psychological distress and anxiety experienced by our children as their own problems. By the way, it is a slow pace compared to Western society, which has studied this phenomenon of trauma earlier than us. At present, Western society has proved that transmission of trauma can go beyond one's mere living environment, and problems may be inherited neurologically through DNA. The experience of trauma not only leaves traces on human emotions, but it is also biologically inherited. Let's take a look at the story of Mark Wolin, director of the Family Constellation Institute, who has studied family trauma for 20 years and has identified the biological heritage of trauma.
One of the ways we can tell that the children of the victims of the Gwangju massacre have been affected, as well as the children of the perpetrators, is a similar situation can arise and trauma symptoms can be uncovered. For example, at the same age, somebody was killed or injured in the massacre, in the uprising. A child around the same age can experience a similar life or death situation. A child can also experience symptoms of the wounding and symptoms of the death. They can re-experience elements of the anxiety, elements of the depression, elements of the pain, the terror, the horror. And we can find this reliving in the succeeding generation that at the same age a child was when his father died.
Efforts to recognize the trauma related to May 18th as a biological hereditary problem had already been made in 2013. A research team from the Seoul National University published a paper titled Effects of Fetal Stress Caused by the Gwangju Uprising in 1980 on the Health of Succeeding Generations. It was a paper analyzing how the stress experienced by pregnant women born in Gwangju affected their children. The results were extraordinary. It was found that newborn babies born after May 18, 1980, had a shorter gestation period and lower birth weight at birth than those who did not. However, the results of this study were not readily accepted by society. It was rather controversial. Some of the forces that distort the historical facts of May 18th have argued and disagreed that they cannot agree with these findings. In the end, the results of the study fell to the point of attack and criticism. Of course, there were many people who sympathized with the research results. Nevertheless, as the debate continued, further research did not proceed.
There's been a lot of research about mothers who were pregnant during the World Trade Center attacks, who went on to develop PTSD, and they delivered babies who also had post-traumatic stress disorder. They had 16 different genetic markers than children who did not experience. Yes, this is one of the findings in the New York study by Rachel Yehuda, that children were smaller for their gestational age. Yes, so it very well could be that the study was conducted with strict measures and proper guidelines. I'm surprised that they've disputed the findings.
During our coverage, we met Mo Hyun-shin, whose mother was 3 months pregnant on May 18th. She was born in Gwangju in 1980. Until she became a teenager, she had no idea that she had suffered trauma from May 18th when she was in the womb.
어머니한테 들은 거는 제가 한 중고등학교 때쯤이었을 것 같아요. 당시에 전남대학교 앞쪽에 사셨는데 그 희생자분
I think I was in middle or high school when I heard the story from my mom. At the time, she lived in front of Cheonnam National University, and my mom lived close to her.
엄마가 이제 저를 12월에 낳으셨으니까 5월 정도면 네, 저를 태중에 갖고 계셨는데
And by the way, because she gave birth to me in December, I was in the womb in May. Anyways, the day it happened, she was living on the second floor, and at that time, the martial army came and took all the young men. My dad said that bullets couldn't penetrate cotton wool blankets, so he wrapped my mom in a blanket and hid her in the wardrobe.
5월 더울 때 엄마는 거기서 이제 떨고 있었는데 장롱 틈으로 보니까 군화발로 군인들이 실제로 방 안까지 다 들어왔어요.
It was May then. When my mom stuck her head out the door, the soldiers were actually coming into the room with their military boots on, and she must have been scared. And looking out of the wardrobe door, you could see everything that was going to happen.
Mo Hyun-shin has been vulnerable to uneasy feelings since she was a child. For example, she began suffering from constant nightmares from the age of 7. Those nightmares were repeated for nearly 20 years.
어릴 때부터 자꾸 그 꿈이었어요. 똑같아요. 그래서 그 중에 하나가
It's been the same dream since I was a kid. It's the same. I often dream of someone trying to attack me through a doorway. That's a nightmare for me. In my dreams, I have sleep paralysis again. And I had that horrible nightmare so often. In the nightmare, through the crack in the door, someone threatens me and is trying to take me out of the wardrobe. Because of the nightmare, I always feel like locking the door when I'm alone. I like to hide, but it feels like someone is trying to pull me out. I've had that horrible nightmare since I was a child.
저 사람이 꼭 저를 끄집어낼 것 같은 그런 느낌이 어릴 적부터 좀 심해가지고.
Mo Hyun-shin, who had been suffering from a nightmare with no known cause for 20 years, participated in a dream healing program. A healing program through dream analysis began in the United States in the late 1960s. When Martin Luther King had been assassinated and racial conflict had reached its peak, many experts attempted to heal the suffering experienced by many African Americans, but it was not easy. In the meantime, Dr. Jeremy Taylor, an American healing counselor, researched extensively the unconscious mind of many African Americans through their dreams, and this led to successful treatment. Since then, dream healing has been widely used to heal the victims of collective trauma. In Korea, dream healing work is happening. Dr. Go Hye-kyung opened the first door. In her analysis of the dreams of millions of people for nearly 2 decades, Dr. Go has discovered a singularity related to the May 18th event. The nightmare that Mo Hyun-shin has been having for nearly 20 years has been a traumatic event for her mother. Her trauma has long been tormenting her in the form of nightmares.
그러니까 사실은 배 속에서 어떤 식으로든 5.18을 경험한 거죠.
She experienced May 18th in the womb.
소화 안 되는 강한 감정?
For her, the world was not safe, and even worse, how would she feel if someone died? The emotions that haven't been digested inside of us, wouldn't this be a kind of entanglement in which we are all connected regardless of generation?
Mo Hyun-shin faced the reality and the huge fear that she did not know about, and eventually she overcame that fear.
네, 우선 그 악몽을 안 꿔요. 그 꿈 작업을 하고 나서
Yes. First of all, I don't have that nightmare anymore. After the dream work, when I had the same dream, I could see the face of the person who kept threatening me, which I hadn't seen so far.
얼굴과 눈을 직접적으로 제가 마주했고 꿈에서 제가 그 사람 손을 칼로 찔렀어요. 정말로.
I saw his face, and I kept eye contact with him. In the dream, I stabbed his hand, and it was an astonishing experience. Dr. Go Hye-kyung said so as well. It was great that I could take some measure by myself, even though it was only in the dream. I think I passed one important stage on the way to knowing myself. Very important.
이런 것들이 중요하구나.
May 18th often appears in the dreams of the victims' second and third generations, and there are traces of trauma of May 18th that they have not experienced directly. It was another experience and proof to suggest that trauma is inherited through generations. Dr. Go once again realized that it is urgent to heal the victims of May 18th in order to cut the passage of trauma. And in 2016, she began his dream healing work with May 18th victims.
가해 눌림이 대부분 다 굉장히 고통받는 이슈였는데
And I let them act out what they experienced in the dream. You know, when you have this nightmare, your body gets paralyzed and wouldn't get better until you wake up. One of the people there was suffering from this symptom for 20 years and had to get a shot from the hospital to make it better.
거기 계셨던 한 분은 20년 동안 일어나도 몸이 안 풀려서 병원에 실려가서 주사를 맞았고 이거를 풀었어야 되는 사람이에요. 근데 그분이 많이 좋아졌었고요.
But she is much better now. And she said she is not having nightmares or traumatic dreams, and she's not afraid of them anymore.
퀄리티들, 잠에 시달리는 것들, 이거는 굉장히 완화가 됐었고요.
However, the change lasted only 8 weeks. The core of the dream healing work is to eliminate the pain that has been able to linger for so long. That healing allowed people to spend time with those who are also hurting and to sympathize, and it was to look at the wound as it was without turning away. Not all of those who were in Gwangju that day in May of 1980 live with trauma that causes them extreme suffering. However, one thing is clear, and it is that May 18th is becoming a disease for many who cannot confront their pain and release it, and the disease grows worse over time.
시간이 지나서 절로 해소되는 일들이 있습니다. 그렇지만 트라우마는 그런 게 아니에요.
Time heals the wounds, but trauma can't be healed as time passes. They get accumulated or overloaded. The overloaded trauma can't be healed, can't be opened.
내 방어에 에너지를 많이 써야 되거든요. 그래서 이 트라우마 지역이나 이런 데 가면 사람들이
Because they use a lot of energy to protect themselves. When you go to some area where people suffered a traumatic event, people there always regard newcomers as enemies. That's natural.
그러니까 사실 이 방어나 이거에 에너지를 너무 많이 써야 되기 때문에
Because they use a lot of energy to protect themselves. They lost their ability to be flexible and they can't accept new things anymore. The ability to embrace something different from me can be weakened.
It has already been proved through numerous examples that a society that has not healed from trauma can never achieve a peaceful and safe community. It is time to worry. May 18th was a fateful day, and it is now the time to act. We must choose to stop the cycle. If so, what can we do now to heal the collective trauma? Professor Kang Young-shin of the Psychology Department of Cheonnam National University says that the first step toward healing from the trauma is for the people to come together.
트라우마가 이제 어떤 것들을 양산을 시키게 되냐면요. 그러니까 피해자와 안 피해자 이렇게 나누게 되어지는 부분들이 생기거든요.
When social trauma happens, in the majority of cases, people try to separate victims and non-victims. I think this separation is a great interruption when it comes to the healing of trauma.
지역사회나 공동체에서 얻는 이런 트라우마는 공동체가 당신은 혼자가 아니다.
Because the healing of trauma can start only by not separating the victims and non-victims. It is important to let traumatized people feel that they are not alone and keep them supported by the local society and the community to strengthen the bonds together, not saying that is your business, your experience, so I cannot understand.
그런 마음에서부터 이 치유는 시작되지 않을까 이런 생각이 듭니다.
The journey to heal traumas from years ago has many knots and it will never be smooth. How will our daily lives be different when we overcome this process? Professor Kang Young-shin advises us to pay attention to the secret of growth hidden in the trauma.
단순히 우리 삶의 목표 자체가 트라우마 사건 이전으로 돌아가는 것 그것보다 더 큰 의미가 이 사건을 통해서 내 삶에게 주는 영향이 분명히 있을 것이다.
The purpose of the trauma treatment can be going back to the time before the trauma occurred. However, it can be even more meaningful if we can gain some lessons from the traumatic events.
부정적이라고 생각했던 이 경험이 나의 삶을 어떻게 긍정적으로 또 변화시켰는가.
The counseling our psychological treatments offer these days follow this trend. They focus on how the negative life experience can positively affect our lives. This is so-called post-traumatic growth. Through that traumatic event, I become a more positive and meaningful person and live a more meaningful life.
저희가 단지 이전으로의 회복이 아니라 그 이상의 질적으로
It implies that the healing could mean not just going back to the time before the event, but seeking for more meaningful life in quality. And this can be called post-traumatic growth.
Those that experience trauma that requires more than simple personal healing must acknowledge the wound together and grow together. Can we experience that together?
진짜 눈물로 세월을 보냈어. 나는 이렇게 고통을 당하고 사네.
From the Japanese colonial period to the Korean War, the May 18th democratization movement, the Daegu subway fire, and the Sewol ferry disaster, we have built and built wound upon wound, and the wounds have yet to be healed. It is not clear how the knot should unravel itself, but there is one thing that is clear. Trauma is inherited by generations, and it eventually runs throughout our society. For those who are living here now, for the future, the wounds in us must surely be healed in the present age.